We've all been walking around believing complete lies about the prehistoric oceans. And honestly, the fact that smart people still fall for this stuff is almost as embarrassing as the myths themselves. Let's start at evolution. Well, Darwin had a problem. The guy who figured out evolution was stumped by something that made zero sense. Picture this, you're looking at rocks from 540 million years ago, and boom, suddenly there's complex life everywhere. Trilobites, weird shell creatures, things with eyes and claws. But when you look at older rocks, nothing. Just emptiness. Scientists called it the Darwin's dilemma, which sounds way more dramatic than it actually was. But Darwin genuinely couldn't figure out why life seemed to just appear out of nowhere during the Cambrian period. The fossil record looked like someone had just flipped a switch. One day, dead planet. The next day, there was life everywhere. For over a century, textbooks taught that the oceans before this explosion were basically sterile. It was dead water floating around a dead rock. Museums built entire displays around this idea. Kids grew up thinking Earth spent billions of years just sitting there doing absolutely nothing, waiting for some cosmic alarm clock to go off. The whole thing made evolution look suspicious. Critics loved pointing out this gap. How do you go from zero life to complex creatures with functioning eyes? Where were the simple ancestors? Darwin himself admitted this was probably the biggest objection to his theory. Scientists kept digging anyways though. They had to find something in those older rocks. The alternative was admitting that complex life just magically showed up, which would make the creationists way too happy. And if you know anything about paleontology, there's a big war between them and creationists. But it turns out the Precambrian wasn't empty at all. We just couldn't see what was there. Bacteria had been throwing their own party for over 3 billion years. The Ediacaran period, right before the Cambrian, was packed with weird soft-bodied creatures that looked nothing like anything alive today. We missed them because they didn't have shells or hard parts. Declaring ancient oceans were lifeless was just the beginning of bad scientific takes. Because in 1843, this British guy named Edward Forbes decided he knew everything about the deep ocean without actually going there. Smart move. Forbes looked at some shallow water samples, noticed fewer animals as he went deeper, and concluded that below 1800 feet, nothing could possibly survive. He called it the Azoic zone, which is a fancy word for dead water. Forbes was so confident about this that he convinced the entire scientific community. For 20 years, everyone just accepted that the deep sea was an underwater graveyard. No life, no animals, just cold darkness and crushing pressure. This wasn't just wrong, it was impressively wrong. Forbes basically took a sample from his bathtub and declared the entire Pacific Ocean empty. But hey, he had credentials, so everyone believed him. This guy's logic was bulletproof, if you ignored reality completely, that is. Pressure increases with depth, light disappears, temperature drops. Obviously, nothing could handle those situations. Never mind that Forbes had zero evidence for this claim. He just eyeballed some numbers and called it science. Meanwhile, fishermen kept pulling up weird stuff from deep water. Dead fish they'd never seen before, strange shells, creatures that looked like they belonged on another planet. But Forbes had spoken, so these findings got dismissed or ignored. The HMS Challenger expedition in the 1870s finally bothered to check Forbes' work. They dropped nets way deeper than 1800 feet and pulled up life, and lots of it. Bizarre, deep-sea creatures that have been living their entire evolutionary history in Forbes' supposedly dead zone. Today, we know the deepest parts of the ocean are crawling with life. The Mariana Trench, 36,000 feet down, has fish swimming around like they own the place. Forbes' Azoic zone turned out to be one of the most biodiverse environments on the planet. And speaking of scientists confidently wrong about ocean life, one guy thought he'd found the actual source of all existence. Thomas Huxley made what he thought was the greatest discovery in human history. In 1868, he examined some mud from the ocean floor and found this weird slimy stuff that seemed to move. Under his microscope, it looked alive, pulsing, flowing. It definitely wasn't just dirt. Huxley was Darwin's biggest supporter, so finding the origin of life would be huge for evolution theory. He named his discovery Bathybius haeckelii. I don't know if I said that right, but go with it.
Bathybius haeckelii.
Bathybius haeckelii, which basically means deep life. Textbooks started printing diagrams of this primordial slime covering the ocean floor. This was supposedly the very substance that birthed all living things. Scientists got excited, really excited. Here was proof that life came from simple organic matter, just sitting there in the deep sea, waiting to evolve. Museums built displays, papers got written, careers got launched. For several years, Bathybius was treated as scientific fact. Researchers described how this living ooze created all the complexity we see in nature. It fitted the missing link between dead matter and living creatures. Evolution finally made perfect sense. Then, the Challenger expedition happened. You know, the same guys who proved Forbes wrong about the lifeless deep sea. Well, they decided to actually study this world-changing discovery up close. The ship's chemist, John Buchanan, took a closer look at Bathybius samples. He ran some tests, did some chemistry, and his conclusion? It wasn't even organic. The stuff was calcium sulfate. Basically, mineral gunk that forms when seawater mixes with alcohol preservative. Huxley had discovered soap scum. The origin of all life was lab contamination. The primordial ooze that explained evolution was just chemical residue on the ocean floor. Huxley admitted his mistake in 1879. Bathybius disappeared from textbooks faster than it appeared. But at least Huxley's mistake was on a scientific error, unlike the centuries of dragon folklore. Medieval people kept finding these weird triangular stones, and they had no clue what they were. The stones were sharp, perfectly shaped, and way too geometric to be natural rocks. So naturally, they decided these were petrified dragon tongues. The story went that during lunar eclipses, dragons and serpents would turn to stone, leaving behind their tongues scattered across the landscape. These glossoperchae, which also means tongue stones, became highly valued. People wore them as jewelry, used them as poison detectors, and traded them for serious money. St. Paul apparently had a hand in creating some of these. Legend claimed he turned all the snakes on Malta to stone, which explained why Malta's beaches were covered in tongue stones. Divine intervention plus practical geology. Very convenient. For over 1,000 years, this dragon tongue theory was accepted as truth. Even educated scholars collected them. The idea that ancient monsters left behind fossilized body parts wasn't questioned. Dragons were real, obviously, so dragon tongues made perfect sense. Nicholas Steno changed everything in 1666. This Danish guy was dissecting a shark's head when he noticed something interesting. The shark's teeth looked exactly the same as those dragon tongues. Everyone was obsessing over. Same shape, same size, same everything. Steno published his findings in 1667. Those mystical dragon tongues, yeah, they were shark teeth. Fossilized shark teeth. The medieval collectors had been wearing prehistoric fish parts around their necks, thinking they were magical dragon remains. Many of these tongue stones came from Megalodon, that giant shark that everyone talks about. So yes, medieval people were basically finding Megalodon teeth and inventing an entire mythology around them. Dragons became extinct sharks, and magical protection became paleontology. Obviously, the dragon tongue business collapsed overnight once people realized they'd been worshipping fish teeth. This is my pet shark, and he says you have to like this video and subscribe to the channel, otherwise he's gonna summon a dragon on you. Right, buddy? Right? But these land discoveries were nothing compared to the sea monsters sailors swore they saw. Imagine you're a sailor in 1750 and something the size of an island starts moving under your ship. Tentacles thicker than tree trunks wrap around your mast. Your entire vessel gets dragged towards what looks like a massive eye staring up from the deep. This wasn't some drunk sailor's story. Multiple crews reported the same thing. The Kraken became so feared that ship captains would change their entire routes just to avoid certain areas of the North Sea. Insurance companies in London started factoring Kraken attacks into their rates. I am not making this up. Bishop Eric Pontoppidan wrote the definitive guide to this monster in 1752. According to him, the Kraken was so huge that sailors would mistake it for land. Ships would anchor on what they thought was an island, only to have it suddenly dive, taking everyone down with it. The creature supposedly had tentacles that could reach the top of sailing masts. When it surfaced to feed, it created whirlpools that could suck down entire fleets. Fishermen claimed that when the Kraken came up to eat, so many fish followed it that you could catch a week's worth in minutes. Norwegian sailors swore they'd seen it breach the surface. Even serious naturalists wrote papers about this island-sized octopus that ruled the deep waters. What's wild is that they were actually seeing something real. Giant squids do exist, and they can grow up to 40 feet long. Their eyes are the size of dinner plates. They have tentacles covered in hooks that can shred flesh. But these squids live in the deep ocean. They avoid ships. They don't attack vessels or create whirlpools. Most importantly, they're not island-sized. Real Kraken was impressive, just not quite the ship-eating nightmare that haunted sailors' dreams. Though sea monsters were scary, nothing beat the government covering up actual living mermaids. Animal Planet aired a documentary in 2012 that broke the internet. Mermaids, The Body Found, showed government scientists discovering actual mermaid bodies, footage of aquatic humanoids swimming in the deep ocean, military cover-ups, evolutionary evidence that humans split into land and sea species millions of years ago. Millions of people watched this. Social media exploded with mermaid sightings. The documentary was so convincing that NOAA, the government ocean agency, had to release an official statement. They literally said no evidence of aquatic humanoids has ever been found. Think about that. A government agency had to publicly deny the existence of mermaids because too many people called asking about them. The show was presented as real science with actual researchers and declassified footage. Viewers had no reason to doubt it. The documentary used something called the aquatic ape theory. This suggests humans went through an aquatic phase in evolution, which explains why we're mostly hairless. Walk upright and hold our breath well. The show took this fringe idea and ran with it, claiming some early humans stayed in the water and became mermaids. Ancient cultures worldwide have mermaid stories. Greek sirens, Celtic selkies, Caribbean water spirits. Every maritime civilization has tales of human fish creatures. This global consistency made the 2012 documentary seem more believable. But here's what actually happened. Sailors would see manatees or seals from a distance. After months at sea, your brain starts playing tricks. A manatee surfacing to breathe, especially one with a baby, could look humanoid enough to start legends. Even Christopher Columbus reported seeing mermaids during his voyage. His journal described creatures with human faces, but fish bodies. Modern researchers checked his route. He was seeing manatees in the Caribbean. Yes, the great explorer confused sea cows for mythical beings. Real ocean mysteries, though, don't need fake documentaries to be terrifying. In 1997, underwater microphones in the Pacific picked up the loudest biological sound ever recorded. The NOAA called it the Bloop. The audio file hit the internet and people lost their minds. This thing was louder than blue whale calls, way louder, and it came from somewhere deep in the ocean near Antarctica. Cryptozoologists went nuts. Forum posts exploded with theories about what could make that noise. Something massive was down there, something bigger than any known animal. The sound profile looked organic. It had that rapid frequency change that living creatures make, not the steady drone of earthquakes or submarines. H.P. Lovecraft fans pointed out that the sound came from near where he placed Cthulhu's underwater city. Coincidence? Probably not, according to the internet. YouTube videos analyzed the audio frame by frame. Documentaries explored the possibility of undiscovered leviathans lurking in oceanic trenches. The Bloop became proof that we knew nothing about our own planet. Here was evidence of something enormous living in the deepest parts of the ocean. This was something that could be ancient, from back in the prehistoric times, something that could produce sounds audible across thousands of miles of water. Marine biologists couldn't explain it, so obviously it had to be a prehistoric monster. Conspiracy theorists had field days. Government cover-ups, hidden sea creatures, prehistoric survivors. Every theory got thrown around. The fact that NOAA couldn't immediately identify the source just made everything worse. Official silence meant they were hiding something big. NOAA kept investigating, and by 2005, they triangulated more sounds to the same area. Pattern recognition software matched the Bloop's acoustic signature to something specific: ice. Massive chunks of Antarctic glacier breaking off and crashing into the ocean. So yes, the legendary ancient prehistoric sea monster was just a really loud iceberg. But while disappointment crushed Bloop believers, shark fans clung to an even bigger lie. The Discovery Channel aired a documentary in 2013 that convinced millions of people Megalodon was still alive. This was called Megalodon, The Monster Shark Lives, and it showed fake footage of a 60-foot shark attacking a research vessel. Actors pretended to be marine biologists. Computer-generated shark attacks looked completely real. The documentary became the highest rated Shark Week episode in history. Social media flooded with Megalodon sightings. People genuinely believed a prehistoric super shark was swimming around the Pacific, hunting whales and dodging submarines. Discovery Channel barely mentioned it was fiction. The disclaimer appeared for about 2 seconds at the end, and most viewers missed it completely. The network marketed this fake documentary alongside real Shark Week programming, so audiences had every reason to trust it. Biologists were furious. They spent years trying to undo the damage, but the lie had already spread too far. Even today, people ask if Megalodon might still exist somewhere in the deep ocean. The fake documentary created a myth that refuses to die. But here is why Megalodon is definitely extinct. These sharks left behind thousands of teeth during their lifetimes. Shark teeth fossilize really well. We find Megalodon teeth all over the world, but none younger than 2.6 million years. If breeding populations existed, fresh teeth would keep showing up, but they don't. Also, Megalodon needed massive amounts of food. We're talking whale-sized meals constantly. Today's oceans have plenty of whales, but none show bite marks from unknown giant sharks. Great whites leave distinctive bite patterns on whale carcasses. A living Megalodon would leave an even bigger, more obvious wound. Don't even get me started on the fact that Megalodon lived in warm oceanic seas. If it was alive today, it would be near the surface, not deep down in the water. They admitted the hoax and damage was done. They convinced an entire generation that paleontology was wrong about one of the ocean's most famous extinct predators. And while this is definitely debunked, some lake monster enthusiasts weren't convinced by ocean hoaxes because they had photographic evidence of a dinosaur. The most famous photo in cryptozoology shows a long neck and a small head poking out of dark water. The 1934 surgeon's photograph from Loch Ness looked exactly how you'd expect a living plesiosaur to appear. Newspapers ran it on front pages worldwide. Finally, proof that dinosaur-era marine reptiles survived in Scottish lakes. Plesiosaur fossils had been known for over a century when this photo surfaced. The resemblance was perfect. Long neck, tiny head, body hidden underwater. Museums had plesiosaur skeletons on display that matched the Loch Ness creature perfectly. Scientists who studied the photo were split. Some dismissed it outright, but others couldn't explain what they were seeing. The image quality was poor enough to hide obvious forgery, but clear enough to show something unusual in the water. Loch Ness became a pilgrimage site for paleontology enthusiasts. If plesiosaurs survived anywhere, a deep Scottish lake made sense. Cold water, limited human activity, and plenty of fish to eat. The ecosystem could theoretically support a small population of prehistoric reptiles. Expeditions searched the lake with sonar, underwater cameras, and no large moving objects, no unusual bone fragments, no environmental DNA from unknown species. Just normal lake stuff. The photo itself got debunked in the 1990s. Turns out it was a toy submarine with a plasticine head attached. But even without the photo, the plesiosaur theory makes no sense. Loch Ness formed after the last ice age, about 10,000 years ago. Plesiosaurs died out 66 million years earlier. Also, plesiosaurs were air-breathing reptiles. They'd have to surface constantly, and tourists with smartphones would have caught that by now. But sometimes, hoax evidence comes from the ocean as well, instead of just a lake. Because a Japanese fishing boat pulled up something in 1977 that stopped the world. The crew found a massive rotting carcass tangled in their nets off New Zealand. Long neck, small head, 4 flipper-like limbs, no dorsal fin. It looked exactly like a dead plesiosaur. Photos went global within days. The carcass was 30 feet long, weighed over 4,000 pounds, and stank so badly the crew almost threw it back immediately. But they recognized they found something incredible. They took measurements, snapped pictures, and cut off tissue samples. Japanese newspapers declared it discovery of the century. Living dinosaur found in modern ocean. The tissue samples went to universities for analysis. Marine biologists prepared papers. Museums started planning exhibits. Creationists jumped on the story immediately. Here was proof that evolution was wrong about extinctions. If plesiosaurs survived 66 million years, maybe the Earth wasn't as old as scientists claimed. The discovery became ammunition in the evolution debate. International media covered it extensively. For months, it seemed like paleontology textbooks would need complete rewrites. Then, the lab results came back. The DNA analysis revealed the truth. The monster wasn't a plesiosaur. It wasn't even a reptile. The carcass was a basking shark, severely decomposed. When large sharks rot, they fall apart in a specific way. The jaws and gills decay first, leaving a long, narrow skull that looks like a small head on a long neck. The fins break down into flipper-like stumps, and the cartilage skeleton maintains the body shape long after the flesh rots away. Every sea monster carcass that's been properly tested has turned out to be a decomposed whale or shark. The ocean is full of weird things, but prehistoric marine reptiles aren't among them. But obviously, Hollywood had to take these real mysteries and make them infinitely worse. Because Jurassic World's Mosasaurus jumps out of a lagoon and swallows a full-grown great white shark in one bite. The crowd cheers, kids' jaws drop, and millions of people walk out of theaters thinking prehistoric marine reptiles were bigger than blue whales. The movie version is about 120 feet long, which is double the size of any known Mosasaurus fossil. The filmmakers admitted they scaled it up for dramatic effect, but audiences didn't get that memo. Suddenly, everyone assumed real mosasaurs were whale-sized ocean destroyers. YouTube videos started comparing Mosasaurus to modern animals. Comment sections filled with arguments about whether it could eat a great white shark whole. Marine reptile exhibits at museums saw visitor numbers spike, with kids asking where the giant ones were hiding. Educational websites had to add disclaimers. The Jurassic World Mosasaurus is not scientifically accurate, but the damage was done. The fictional version became more famous than the real fossil. It was the Velociraptor all over again. The actual Mosasaurus reached about 56 feet maximum, which is still massive by the way, but that's roughly the size of a humpback whale. These things were apex predators that ruled the late Cretaceous seas 66 million years ago. They ate sharks, other marine reptiles, and even smaller mosasaurs. But they weren't kaiju monsters capable of breaching like dolphins. Real mosasaurs had heavy, dense bones that kept them submerged. They hunted by ambush, not by launching themselves out of water to grab flying reptiles. The movie also got their habitat wrong. Mosasaurus lived in the open ocean, not a contained lagoon. They needed vast territories and migrated across ancient seaways. Keeping one in an aquarium would have been impossible, even with Jurassic Park technology. I mean, hell, have you ever seen a great white shark in an aquarium? No? Well, there's a reason why. Same logic here. Real Mosasaurus was plenty terrifying without Hollywood exaggeration. A 56-foot marine lizard with bone-crushing jaws and flippers instead of legs sounds scary enough to me. But apparently, another myth was going around at the time, that beach walkers kept finding proof that Hollywood got it right about the deep sea, because mysterious blobs of rotting flesh wash up on beaches worldwide, and every single time someone claims they've found a sea monster, the pattern never changes. Giant mass of white rubbery tissue appears on shore, local news runs mystery creature found, headlines. Marine biologists sigh and pack their testing equipment. The St. Augustine monster started this whole thing in 1896, an 18-foot mass of fibrous tissue washed up in Florida. It had what looked like stumpy arms, and the discoverer was convinced he'd found the remains of a giant octopus. Scientists initially agreed. This had to be some sort of colossal cephalopod from the ancient times. Newspapers ran wild with the story. Octopus bigger than the giant squid found dead in Florida. Museums wanted samples. Other scientists demanded to examine it. For years, this blob was considered proof that massive unknown creatures lurked in the oceans. Similar discoveries kept happening. The Bermuda blob in 1988, the Chilean blob in 2003, the Tasmanian globster in 1960. Each time, cryptozoologists got excited about possible sea monsters or prehistoric survivors washing ashore. But DNA testing ruined all of the fun. Every single globster that's been properly analyzed turns out to be whale blubber or shark cartilage. When whales die and decay, their tough connective tissue forms these shapeless masses. The blubber separates from bones and organs, creating a rubbery blob that looks nothing like a whale anymore. Again, sharks do this too, as we talked about earlier. So the St. Augustine monster, whale blubber. The Chilean blob, more whale blubber. Every mysterious beach carcass follows the same pattern: excitement, monster theories, DNA testing, disappointment. And those are just some of the craziest misconceptions that people still believe about the ocean. In fact, I believed a couple of these things until I researched this video. What did you believe? I'm not ashamed to admit it. I thought the Mosasaurus was way bigger than it actually is. But apparently, it's just like baby-sized. Like baby, but still big. You get what I mean. Anyways, if you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content about prehistory, dinosaurs, and all that good stuff. And if you want to watch another one of our videos, you should click the video on screen now.